For 16 years, I lived with a man who told me I was lucky to have him, and somewhere in there, I started believing him. This is the story of the night I locked myself in a bathroom at a family dinner and finally chose myself, with my children watching me walk out the door. The thing nobody tells you about leaving is that the loudest moment of your life can happen in complete silence. Mine happened in my mother-in-law's downstairs bathroom, sitting on the closed lid of a toilet I had cleaned 100 times, staring at a hand towel I had bought her for Christmas 3 years ago. There was a turkey in the oven and my children were laughing in the next room, and my husband was telling a story I had heard 1,000 times. And I knew, the way you know your own name, that I was not going home with him. I want to start before that, though, because the bathroom only made sense because of everything that came before it. My name does not matter for this. What matters is that I was 39 years old that night, and for most of my life people had been telling me I was too much, too loud, too emotional, too opinionated, too quick to cry, too quick to laugh, too quick to want things. My mother used to say it like a warning, like she was trying to save me from myself. Tone it down, sweetheart. Nobody likes a girl who takes up the whole room. I learned to make myself smaller before I learned to ride a bike. So when I met him at 22, in the back of a bookstore in a town I do not live in anymore, and he looked at me across a stack of paperbacks and laughed at something I said and told me I was the most interesting person he had met in months, I felt like I had been waiting my whole life for someone to say that to me. He was older. He was steady. He had a job and an apartment and a way of listening that made you feel like the only person in any room. I thought, finally somebody who can handle me. I want to be honest about that because I think it matters. I did not walk into that relationship blind. I walked into it grateful. That gratitude was the soil everything else grew in. He courted me hard in the beginning, flowers at my work, notes in my coat pocket. He would call my mother just to chat, and she would hang up the phone and look at me like I had finally done something right. He told me I was brilliant. He told me my laugh was the best sound he had ever heard. He told me he had never met anyone like me, and the way he said it made it sound like a miracle, like he had been searching the whole world, and there, I was in the back of a bookstore in a town that did not even matter. We got married 2 years later in my parents' backyard. I wore a dress my sister helped me pick out. My sister, who you should remember, because she is the one who saw it first, and she is the one who never stopped leaving the door open for me, even when I closed it in her face. Her name in this story is Renee. Everything else can stay vague, but you should know her name. Renee pulled me aside the morning of the wedding. I was in our childhood bedroom in a slip, and she was zipping up the back of my dress, and she stopped halfway and looked at me in the mirror and said, "You know you can still change your mind, right?" I laughed. I thought she was being dramatic. I thought she was jealous even, which is something I am ashamed of now. She let it go. She finished zipping the dress. She smiled in all the photos. But she had said it, and I had heard it, and for the rest of my marriage there was a tiny part of me that remembered the way her hands had paused on that zipper. The first year was good. I want to say that because it is true, and because if it had not been good, I would not have stayed long enough for it to become what it became. We had an apartment with bad carpet and a window that faced a parking lot, and we made dinner together on Tuesdays, and he would put on records, and we would dance in the kitchen like people in a movie. I thought, this is what it feels like to be loved by someone who is not afraid of you. I thought my mother was wrong. I thought I have made it out. Then I got pregnant, and something changed. I want to be careful here because I have been asked 100 times exactly when it changed, and I have never been able to answer. It was not a switch. It was a slow dimming, like someone turning down the lights in a room one click at a time. So slow that your eyes adjust, and you do not notice you are sitting in the dark until somebody walks in and asks why it is so hard to see. The first thing I noticed was the way he started talking about money. I had a job I loved, working at a small magazine, writing little pieces about local artists and farmers and the kind of stories nobody else wanted to tell. The pay was bad. We both knew the pay was bad. He had always teased me about it in a way that felt affectionate, like he was proud of me for doing something I cared about even though it did not bring much in. But after the baby came, he stopped teasing and started calculating. He would sit at the kitchen table with a notebook and add things up out loud. daycare, diapers, the car payment. He would look up at me and say, "It does not really make sense for you to keep working, does it?" And I would feel a knot in my stomach that I did not know how to name yet. I quit the magazine when our daughter was 4 months old. I told myself it was my idea. I told everyone it was my idea. I think a part of me even believed it. Our son came 2 years after that. By then I had been out of work long enough that going back felt impossible. My resume had a hole in it the size of a child. He would say, "You do not need to worry about that. I make plenty for both of us. You should be focusing on the kids." And on paper that sounded loving. On paper that sounded like a man who wanted to take care of his family. But underneath the paper there was something else, and I could feel it, and I could not name it, and not being able to name it made me feel crazy. This is the part where I have to talk about the asking. I do not remember the first time I asked him for something, and he made me regret it. I remember 100 small moments that ran together. I remember asking if we could go visit my sister for a weekend, and the way his face changed, and the 3 days of silence that followed, and how by the end of the third day I was apologizing without knowing exactly what I was apologizing for. I remember asking if he could come home a little earlier on Thursdays so I could have an hour to myself, and the lecture I got about how hard he worked and how little I understood about real exhaustion. I remember asking if we could see a counselor, just once, just to talk, and the way he laughed, not cruelly but with this terrible patient amusement, like I was a child who had suggested we fly to the moon. The lesson took years to learn, but I learned it. I stopped asking. I stopped asking for time, for help, for company, for anything. And here is the thing nobody warns you about. When you stop asking, the asking does not go away. It just turns inward. It becomes a constant low hum of unmet need that you carry around inside your chest, and you start to hate yourself for having needs at all, because needs are what get you in trouble. Needs are what make him sigh. Needs are what make the house cold for days at a time. I stopped asking for what I needed because the punishment for asking was always worse than going without. And once I learned that, I forgot how to know what I needed at all. That is the real damage, not the things he said. The way he taught me to disappear my own wanting before it could become a problem. He had this way of rewriting things that was so smooth I sometimes wondered if I was the one who was wrong. We would have a fight, a real fight, the kind where I cried and he raised his voice and the kids hid in their rooms, and the next day he would talk about it like it had been something else entirely. "Oh, you were just upset because you were tired. Oh, that is not what I said, you are remembering it wrong. Oh, sweetheart, you always make things bigger than they are, that is just how you are." And I would stand there in the kitchen with a cup of coffee going cold in my hands and try to hold onto what had actually happened the night before. And it would slip through my fingers like water, because he was so sure and I was so tired. And after a while, it was easier to take his version than to fight for mine. I started writing things down, not in a journal exactly, on the backs of receipts, on the inside cover of a cookbook. On a post-it note I stuck inside the lid of my tampon box because I knew it was the one place he would never look. Just little things. The date and one line about what happened. He said I was crazy for thinking he was on his phone too much. He said I never asked him to come to the parent-teacher conference when I had asked him 3 times. He said I was the one who started it when I had been in the other room when he started it. I do not know exactly when I started doing this. I think it was around the time our daughter turned 8. I think I needed proof, even if the proof was only for me. He never hit me. I want to say that because it matters and because I know what people think when they hear the word abuse. He never hit me. He never threw anything. He never put his hands on me in a way that left a mark. What he did was quieter than that. What he did was tell me, over and over and over again in 100 different ways, that I was lucky. Lucky he had picked me. Lucky he was patient with me. Lucky he tolerated my moods, my family, my opinions, my body after 2 children, my friends, my taste in books, my way of loading the dishwasher. Lucky he had not left me, the way any reasonable man would have, given how difficult I was to live with. And the thing is, I believed him. I believed him because he said it with such certainty, and because I had been told my whole life that I was too much, and because here was a man who said he could handle me, And if he was telling me I was barely handleable, then he must know, because he was the one doing the handling. I felt grateful and ashamed and tired all at once, and the tiredness was the worst part, because it kept me from thinking clearly enough to see what was happening. Renee saw it. Renee always saw it. She would come visit and she would watch us and she would try to find a moment alone with me in the kitchen, and she would say things like, "Are you okay? Really, are you okay?" And I would say, "Of course I am okay. Why would you ask?" And she would look at me with so much love it almost hurt, and she would say, "I am here whenever you want to talk. I am not going anywhere. I will always pick up the phone." And I would change the subject, because what she was offering was a door I could not bear to look at. Because looking at a door means admitting you are in a room you want to leave. For years I told her I was fine. For years she did not believe me. For years she kept calling anyway, kept inviting me to things I did not come to, kept sending me cards on my birthday with little notes that said the same thing in different ways. "I love you. I am here. The door is open." I think the thing that started cracking me open was something small. Most things are. It was a Tuesday in October, and I was at the grocery store buying things for dinner, and I picked up a magazine at the checkout, just to flip through it, and there was an article in it about a woman who had left her marriage. The article was not even very good. It was the kind of magazine writing I used to be embarrassed by when I worked at the magazine. But there was a line in it that I have not been able to forget, and I want to put it here exactly the way I remember it, even though I know my memory is imperfect. The line was something like, "You do not have to wait until it gets worse. You are allowed to leave a life that is only quietly killing you." I stood in that checkout line and I felt something move in my chest that I had not felt in years. It was not anger. It was not sadness. It was something more like recognition, like meeting your own reflection in a window you did not know was there. I put the magazine back on the rack because I did not want him to find it. I went home and made dinner and put the kids to bed and lay next to him in the dark and stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time I had wanted anything for myself. I could not. That was the first crack. After that, more things started slipping through. I started noticing how my children watched him, my daughter especially. She was 11 by then, and she had developed this habit of going very still when he walked into a room, the way I had. The way I did. I had spent 11 years so focused on managing him that I had not noticed my daughter learning how to manage him too. The day I noticed, I went into the bathroom and locked the door and put my forehead against the cool tile of the wall, and I thought, "Oh God, what have I done? What have I let her see? What have I taught her about love?" I want to say that was the moment I left. It was not. I was not ready yet. I went back out into the kitchen and I made spaghetti and I laughed at his joke about traffic and I went to bed next to him and I kept living in the house. But something had shifted. The thing in my chest that had moved in the grocery store had not moved back. It was sitting there now, a small bright thing, watching. I called Renee a few weeks later. Not to tell her anything specific, just to hear her voice. She picked up on the second ring like she always did. She said hello and then she said, "Are you okay?" And I started crying. I did not know I was going to cry until I was already crying, the kind of crying that has been waiting 11 years for somewhere to land. She did not say anything for a long time. She just stayed on the phone and let me cry. When I could finally speak, I said, "I think something is wrong with me." And she said, "No, honey. There is nothing wrong with you. There is something wrong with where you are." We talked for 2 hours. I told her things I had not told anyone, things I had barely told myself. I told her about the asking and the punishments. I told her about the rewriting and the way I had stopped trusting my own memory. I told her about my daughter going still. She listened to all of it. When I was done, she said, "Whatever you decide, I am here. I will come get you in the middle of the night if you need me to. I will help you find a lawyer. I will let you sleep in my guest room for a year. But you do not have to decide tonight. You just have to know that you can." I did not decide that night, but I knew that I could, and that was different. The thing that finally tipped me over was the family dinner at his mother's house. It was supposed to be his mother's birthday, but really it was just an excuse for the whole extended family to get together and for him to be the center of attention, which was his favorite thing to be. I had been dreading it for 2 weeks. I had laid out everyone's clothes the night before. I had made the dish his mother had asked me to bring. I had brushed my daughter's hair and tied a ribbon in it because his mother liked when she looked old-fashioned. I had done everything right. I had been doing everything right for 16 years. We got there, and his mother kissed his cheek and ignored mine, the way she had been doing for 16 years. He went into the living room with his brothers, and I went into the kitchen with the women, and I peeled potatoes, and I smiled, and I asked about everyone's children, and I felt the bright thing in my chest watching everything. At dinner, he told a story about me. I had heard it before. Everyone at the table had heard it before. It was the story about the time I had supposedly almost burned down the kitchen trying to make crepes, except that what had actually happened was that the smoke detector had gone off because of a piece of butter on the burner, and there had been no fire, and I had not almost burned anything down. He told it the way he always told it, with that affectionate, exasperated tone, the look around the table that said, "Can you believe what I have to put up with?" Everybody laughed. My daughter laughed too, just a little, because she had learned that you laugh when Daddy tells the crepe story. And I sat there with a forkful of green beans halfway to my mouth, and I looked across the table at my 11-year-old daughter laughing at a story about how stupid her mother was, and the bright thing in my chest stood up. I excused myself to the bathroom. I do not even remember walking down the hall. I remember closing the door and locking it, and sitting down on the closed lid of the toilet, and looking at the hand towel I had bought my mother-in-law for Christmas 3 years ago, the one with the little embroidered flowers on it that she had complained about and then put out anyway. I sat there for a long time. I could hear the family laughing in the dining room. I could hear my daughter's voice, high and bright, asking for more rolls. I could hear him telling another story. And I thought, very clearly, the way you think things when there is no more noise in your head. I am not going home with him. Not tonight. Not ever. I am taking my children and I am leaving, and I do not care what it costs me because the cost of staying is everything I have left. I did not cry. I did not shake. I sat there on that toilet seat and I felt more like myself than I had felt in over a decade. I took out my phone and I texted Renee. I said, "Can you come get me?" I said, "I need to leave him tonight." She wrote back in less than a minute. She said, "I am already in the car." I did not come out of the bathroom right away. I sat there until I could trust my face. Then I washed my hands and I dried them on the embroidered towel, and I went back out into the dining room and I sat down next to my husband and I ate 3 more bites of mashed potatoes. I do not know why I did that. Maybe so that nothing felt rushed. Maybe so that I could look around that table one more time and see clearly what I was leaving and what I was not. When dinner was over, I helped clear the dishes. I dried glasses next to his mother and made small talk about her tomatoes. I went into the living room and I picked up my daughter's coat from the back of the couch and I held it for a moment, and then I knelt down in front of her and I said, "Sweetheart, we are going to go for a ride with Aunt Renee." She looked at me with her father's eyes and she said, "Why?" And I said, "Because I need you with me right now." And something in her face changed. She did not ask anything else. She just stood up and let me put her coat on. My son was harder. He was 7, and he was tired, and he wanted to stay because his cousins were there. I picked him up, and I held him against my hip the way I had when he was a baby, and I whispered into his hair that we were going on an adventure with Aunt Renee. He went limp against my shoulder. My husband was in the kitchen. He saw me with the kids and the coats, and he said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I am going home with Renee tonight." He said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "I will get my things tomorrow." He took a step toward me, and I felt my whole body brace, the way it had been bracing for 16 years, and then I felt the bright thing in my chest stand up again, and I said, very quietly, "Do not." I said it the way you say a thing you mean. He stopped. His mother had come in from the dining room. She was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. I could not tell if it was confusion or contempt or something almost like recognition. I will never know. I did not stay long enough to ask. I walked out the front door with my daughter's hand in mine and my son on my hip. Renee was at the curb. The dome light of her car was on, and I could see her face through the windshield, and she looked at me like I was the most precious thing she had ever seen. I put the kids in the back seat, and I buckled them in, and I closed the door, and I walked around to the passenger side, and I got in and I closed that door too. And I want to tell you something true. The sound of that car door closing was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my life. He stood in the doorway of his mother's house and watched us drive away. I watched him in the side mirror until we turned the corner. He did not run after us. He did not yell. He just stood there, getting smaller until he was gone. That night we slept at Renee's. The kids in her guest room. Me on her couch with one of her old quilts pulled up to my chin. She made me tea and she did not ask me any questions, and she did not tell me I was brave, and she did not tell me I was doing the right thing. She just sat in the chair across from me until I fell asleep. And when I woke up at 3 in the morning gasping, she was still there. And she said, "I am here, go back to sleep, I am here." I want to tell you that the next part was easy. It was not. The next year was the hardest year of my life, and there were nights I almost went back, not because I missed him, but because I was terrified of how big the world was and how small I had become inside that house. He fought me on everything. He told everyone we knew that I had lost my mind. He froze our joint accounts the first week, and I had to borrow money from my sister to buy my children's school clothes. He told the kids things about me that I am still working to undo. He showed up at my work, when I finally got a work to show up at, just to remind me that he could find me whenever he wanted. But here is what I want you to hear if you are listening to this and you are sitting in a house that is quietly killing you. He could not put me back. Once I was out, I was out. The bright thing in my chest had stood up and it would not sit back down. I got a job at a small newspaper. The pay was bad. He would have laughed. I did not care. I wrote a piece my second month there about a woman in our town who ran a community garden, and when I saw my name printed on the page, I cried in the parking lot for 20 minutes because I had forgotten what it felt like to make something that was mine. I started going to a counselor, a woman about my age with kind eyes and a notebook who let me cry and then asked me questions I did not always want to answer. She was the one who helped me name things. She was the one who taught me the word gaslighting. The first time she said it, I felt like someone had handed me a flashlight in a room I had been stumbling around in for 16 years. She said, "You are not crazy. You were made to feel crazy. Those are different things." I wrote that down on the back of a receipt and I taped it to my bathroom mirror. My daughter took the longest to come back to me. For a while, she was angry. She missed her father, and her father was very good at making sure she knew which one of us had broken the family. There were months when she would barely speak to me. There was a night she screamed in my face that I had ruined everything, and I sat on the floor of her bedroom afterward and shook for an hour. But I did not break. I did not fight her. I told her I loved her, and I told her I was not going anywhere, and I told her she could be as angry as she needed to be. And slowly, she came back. Not all at once. In small ways. A hand on my shoulder while I was washing dishes. A drawing on my pillow. A morning, almost a year in, when she came into the kitchen and put her arms around my waist and said, "Mom, I am glad we live here now." I had to step away from the stove so I would not burn the eggs with my crying. My son adjusted faster, the way younger ones sometimes do. He missed his cousins more than he missed his father, which broke my heart and also told me everything I needed to know. Here is the part that matters most to me. My children watched me leave. They watched me pick up my daughter's coat and put it on her and carry my son out of his grandmother's house in the middle of dinner. They saw me get in the passenger seat of Renee's car. They saw the bright thing in my chest stand up, even if they did not have words for it yet. And I hope with everything I have left, that it taught them something about what they deserve. I hope my daughter remembers, when she is 22 and a man in a bookstore tells her she is the most interesting person he has met, that her mother once walked out of a house with her hand in his. I hope she knows the difference between being chosen and being claimed. I hope my son grows into the kind of man whose wife never has to write things on the inside of her tampon box. I am 41 now. I live in a small apartment with my children. The carpet is bad and the window faces a parking lot. Sometimes I put on records and we dance in the kitchen, the three of us, and my daughter rolls her eyes the way teenagers do, but she dances anyway, and my son spins until he falls down laughing. I am still becoming myself again. It is slower than the movies make it look. There are days I still hear his voice in my head, telling me I am too much, telling me I am lucky, telling me I am remembering it wrong. There are days I pick up the phone to call him, not because I want him back, but because 16 years of being told who you are is a hard habit to break. On those days, I call Renee instead. She always picks up on the second ring. I have not started dating again. I do not know if I will. I am not in any hurry to hand myself to someone else. Right now, I am too busy getting acquainted with the woman I left in the back of that bookstore at 22. She is still in there. She is older now, and she is tired, and she has scars I cannot see in the mirror. But she is funny. She is opinionated. She cries easily and laughs loudly. She is too much, the way my mother said, and the way he said, and the way the world keeps trying to say to women like us. And I am finally learning that being too much is not the problem. The problem was always the people who could not hold me without trying to make me smaller. If you are listening to this and you are sitting in a house where you have stopped asking for what you need because the punishment is always worse than going without, I want you to hear me. You are not crazy. You are not too much. You are not lucky to have him. The bright thing in your chest is still there, even if you cannot feel it right now. It is waiting for you. It will stand up when it is time. And when it does, somebody will be in the car already. Maybe it is a sister. Maybe it is a friend. Maybe it is a stranger on the internet who once sat on a closed toilet lid in her mother-in-law's downstairs bathroom and decided she was not going home. I am in the car. The door is open. I am not going anywhere.